Assalamualaikum, or welcome to session 96 of the Harmon Islamic Study Circle, the HISC Seerah sessions, where we're continuing with the Battle of Badr. And inshallah today we'll talk about the reaction inside Mecca and the reaction inside Medina to the Prophet ﷺ's resounding victory. And last week, obviously, we talked about the prisoners of war that were taken. We talked about the discussion that happened about what to do with the prisoners of war and the outcome of some of the prisoners of war. Excuse me. So just to recap very briefly about Badr. So Thursday, the Prophet ﷺ arrived with his little group, not expecting to fight a war. They were expecting to meet the caravan, but then it became clear that there was a war afoot. So they camped Thursday night, or Thursday afternoon, and in the evening the Quraish arrived. The battle happened the next day, on the Friday, shortly in the early hours of the morning after sunrise. Then the battle happened, one-sided victory, and then there were discussions about what to do with the booty, what to do with the prisoners of war. On the same day, on the Friday, we also have the Romans fighting the Persians. I'll come on to that in a second. Then Saturday, Prophet ﷺ received revelation around what to do with the prisoners of war, probably in as far as his judgment was to ransom them, whereas Umar said we should have executed them, and the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr were crying because of that. And then on the later on the Saturday, we suspect the Quraysh returned. We don't know for sure whether they went straight back or whether they just composed themselves and then went back on the Saturday. On the Sunday, the Prophet ﷺ, he'd camped at on Badr for 3 days. So on the Sunday, they stayed there. Probably the burials happened on the Friday and the Saturday. And then on the Monday, the Prophet ﷺ, he then returned to Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ, as I say, he was there for 3 days on the plains of Badr, consolidating his victory, recuperating, dealing with the issues such as what to happen with the Shaheed. So again, we've not had the situation where we've got martyrs before in Islam. So the rulings around martyrs, martyrdom were then given. And again, the ruling for the Shaheed, the martyrs, are quite clear. I think there were about 15 people who were Shaheed on the Battle of Badr from the Muslim side, the Sahabi, and the martyr, the body isn't washed. There's no ritual ghusl. You don't do a janazah on them because they are not dead in this dimension, as it were. You don't do salatul janazah. They are buried essentially where they were slain, where they died. The wounds of the Shaheed aren't cleaned. The Prophet said that when they are arisen on the Day of Judgment, there will be their wounds will be bleeding, but the blood will have the scents, the perfume of musk. And they're clothed. They're buried in the clothes. They're not buried in the ritual cloth. So all of these rules, came down because this is the first time that there were Shaheed, and then obviously dumping the bodies. Dumping the bodies of the Quraysh and the non-Muslims who died. So on the day, again, because we've been sort of busy dealing with the Battle of Badr, on the same day as the Battle of Badr, there was another important historical event that happened, and that was the fact that the Romans, the army of Heraclius, defeated Khosrow, or the army of the Persians. Now, we mentioned this many months ago, in as far as halfway through the Meccan Seerah, probably about 8.5 years ago, 8 or so years before Badr. What happened was that Surah Al-Rum was revealed in translation. Alif Lam Mim. The Byzantines have been defeated in the nearest land, but after their defeat, they will overcome within a short period of time, 3 to 9 years. To Allah belongs the command before and after, and that day the believers will rejoice, and the victory of Allah, in the victory of Allah, He gives victory to whom He wills. He is the exalted in might and the merciful. So what we have there is Allah giving a clear prediction that within 10 years, under 9 years, although at the moment it seems that the Persians are on a roll, and they were on a roll, and they were sweeping the Romans left, right and centre, pushing back the Roman army, and it seemed inconceivable that the Romans would turn that around. They were on the decline, the Persians were on the up. And then Surah Al-Rum came and said, look, within this space of time, you will find that there will be a decisive victory, and on that day, the Muslims will be happy. Now, the inference at the time in Mecca was that the Muslims would be happy that the Romans beat the Persians, because the Romans essentially are from a monotheistic background, and the Persians essentially are from a polytheistic background, and so that's why they have these tribal allegiances. On hearing that Quranic verses, Ubay ibn Khalaf, he started teasing Abu Bakr, and he said, do you really think the Romans are going to beat the Persians? I mean, look, you know, it's so one-sided. Can you wake up? And then he decided, or challenged him to a wager. And I mean, it's a bit like, you know, saying well, it's not exactly like it, because there were two superpowers, but it's almost like saying that the Afghans are going to overtake and defeat comprehensively the Americans, or, you know, the current Palestinians are going to comprehensively obliterate their enemies. So it just seemed inconceivable at the time, because it was just so one-sided. The tide had turned. So Abu Bakr, he agreed to the wager, and again, this is before the rules of gambling, but this isn't technically a wager, because this is this is the word of Allah. We know it is going to be true. So Abu Bakr had that certainty. So then they laid a wager over however many camels, and one narration is that halfway through, because Abu Bakr was forced to give a time limit, he said he took the middle of the two periods between 3 and 9 years. He took 6 years, whereas it could have been up to 9 years. But anyway, 6 years later, Ubay ibn Khalaf, he came back and took his winnings, and Abu Bakr then sort of extended it to 9 years. But Abu Bakr wasn't able to collect on his winnings, because Ubay ibn Khalaf was one of those who was killed in Badr. So on that day, as predicted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an, and as I say, it's one of the very few explicit predictions, on the day of Badr, the Romans routed the Persians, and it said, you know, because there were some internal dispute amongst the Persians, some of their own generals reneged or turned on themselves, you know, and caused confusion, and this was the tipping point where the Romans then started to gain the upper hand. But that was on the day of Badr. So although the verse of the Qur'an says on that day the believers will rejoice, the interpretation is they will rejoice because of the victory of the Romans. But this was the day of the Battle of Badr, and the Muslims were rejoicing for another reason, which is that obviously the victory of of Badr on that day. But again, that's a side issue, but an important issue, certainly because Allah talks about it in the Qur'an. So that's what happened on the day of Badr. So getting back to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Muslims didn't find this out until, many days, if not weeks later, when news came to them of the Roman victory. But again, that had all been subsumed by the victory on Badr, so it wasn't something that they really paid too much attention to, other than reinforcing their belief in the promises of Allah. So we're not exactly sure when the Quraish went back, but obviously they were defeated on the Friday. Whether they went back on the Friday or the next day, I don't think it's documented that well. But the Quraysh, literally, they ran from the battlefield. They ran for their lives, obviously, when they saw, the one-sidedness of the victory so comprehensive. And you've got the angels helping the Muslims, you've got the Muslims charging as well. So one of their fast riders, Haysamaan al-Khuzai, he was sort of dispatched, or he was the first one to enter in to Mecca. So he went in, and he was battered and bruised and bloodied and wounded, and he galloped into the middle of Mecca near the Kaaba, and then he started screaming and shouting. People saying, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And then he goes, "Utbah has been killed. Shayba has been killed. Hakim has been killed. Umayyah bin Khalaf has been killed." And he's going through the list and literally listing all the nobles, all the elite, all of these people. Yes, so-and-so's been killed, so-and-so's been killed, so-and-so's been killed. And this was completely unexpected. And the people of Mecca, they just didn't know how to handle this. So they started saying, well, this guy, he's obviously gone mad. I mean, 1,000 well-armed, equipped people of Quraysh, they went. How could they be defeated by the small band of Muslims? And then, so they kept challenging him, saying, look, he's obviously mad. So he just kept on going through the names of all the people, and then one of them, Safwan ibn Umayyah, who was the son of Umayyah bin Khalaf, he sat in the khatim with his back to the Kaaba, sort of slightly out of sight. So he says to his mate, says, look, this guy has obviously gone mad. Go and ask him what happened to me, as in what happened to Safwan ibn Umayyah. Because obviously if he says Safwan has also died, then we know he's just lost it. So then, his friend goes up to Haysamaan and said, so what happened to Safwan ibn Umayyah? And then the chap looks at him, and said, Safwan? Well, he's sitting right over there. And I saw with my very own eyes where they killed his father and his brother. And then things started to sink in. The truth began to sink in, and then obviously the rest of the army would come back, dribs and drabs, completely humiliated. I mean, they'd lost their whole elite. They were sort of leaderless, rudderless. So a great sense of anxiety and depression just befell all the people of Mecca, and this was, this was like the dream of Attika, where she said, look, that, and we talked about the dream of Attika before Badr, where the camel will be standing on top of the mountain, standing on top of the Kaaba, and then the boulder will come and it will shatter, and the shrapnel will go to every house. Here, everyone was affected by the Badr defeat, and so because of this, it was just slowly sinking in, and there was a sense of grief all over. And there were very few leaders left now. So you had Abu Lahab left, you had Abu Sufyan, you had Suhail bin Amr, but he was a prisoner of war. So Abu Lahab, he'd hired someone to fight in his place, because he was, again, the leader of Banu Hashim at the time, so it would not have been appropriate for him to go either. So then he arranges, because Al-Abbas has also been a prisoner of war, he arranges to meet Abu Sufyan in the house of Al-Abbas. And to sort of find out, because all the rumours are coming in, and he just cannot believe this. Everyone else has been completely decimated. So Abu Sufyan, by this stage, because he wasn't directly involved in the fighting, and he'd protected the caravan, and he'd said, "Look, let's not fight because the caravan is safe." But then, the enormity of Badr, dawned on him, and he's met up with the people. He's had first-hand accounts of what happened, and he feels this sense of guilt and responsibility, because the Battle of Badr, at the end of the day, was his call. It was his caravan. He went to Syria. He discovered that the Muslims were after the caravan. He came back. And then he diverted the caravan, but he was the one who ordered the Quraish to come and help. It was his doing. He sent the letter. He sent the person who'd ripped up his clothes and cut off the nose of the camel and said, "Look, you need to help." And on the back of that, the Quraysh went. So he had this tremendous personal guilt that actually Badr was. The defeat of Badr was due to him. It was the caravan he was leading, and it was his say-so that the Quraysh came to defend it, and then turned into the war. So then Abu Lahab, he arranged to meet Abu Sufyan privately in the house of Al-Abbas, because Al-Abbas wasn't there, and it was empty. And he goes, "Look, I don't believe these deserters. I don't believe what these people are saying. This cannot be true. So tell me exactly what happened." So Abu Sufyan, he sort of turns to Abu Lahab. And again, Abu Lahab is one of those people who was a very bitter enemy of the Muslims, a very crude enemy of the Muslims. And again, he was one of the very first ones who publicly criticized the Prophet ﷺ. And then we've got the surah revealed when the Prophet ﷺ was publicly doing his dawah. The surah revealed and saying, Tabbat yada Ali, where Allah condemns Abu Lahab to hellfire for all of eternity. And again, Abu Lahab knew that, and Abu Lahab had, in his own existence, the ability to disprove the Qur'an, to disprove Islam for good, because Allah, over a decade ago, Allah is condemning Abu Lahab to the fire. And Abu Lahab, if he just uttered one phrase that he is now a Muslim, it would have turned upon everything that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about, and would have undermined the Qur'an. He had that power. He knew he had that power in him, but he was too proud to say that and admit that. So Abu Lahab, he's now in this position where he just doesn't know what to do. So he talks with Abu Sufyan. So Abu Sufyan says, "Okay, look, by Allah, as soon as we met the Muslims, it was as if they were overpowering us without doing anything, okay, and that they killed us as they pleased, and they took us as prisoners as they pleased. And despite all of that, despite the fact that basically they're just we were handing ourselves over to be slaughtered. We were handing ourselves over to be taken as prisoners. I cannot criticize our side for that, for by Allah, I saw men covered with white faces, riding on horses that were black and white, so really precious horses, hovering between the heavens and the earth. So this is, confirmed narration that all of the, that a lot of the Quraysh had seen. You've got this army of angels coming down and being on the side of the Muslims. And he says, look, I don't blame us. We were well equipped. We wanted to fight, but what can we do? This is something supernatural. I can't explain it. And then when, as he's explaining that, then in Al-Abbas's house is Abu Rafi, he was one of the early Muslims, and he was the slave of Al-Abbas and the slave of Fadl. Now Fadl, the wife of Al-Abbas, who is the uncle of the Prophet, who is a prisoner of war, who needs to pay 4,000 for his own ransom. So Fadl, she was one of the earliest Muslims. It said that she was the second female Muslim after Khadija, but she kept her Islam quite private, obviously, and it wasn't public known. And Abu Rafi, he himself again was a secret Muslim. So when he heard that what Sufyan was saying, he said, Bismillah, by Allah, these are the angels who have come to help the Muslims. It was just, he's minding his business, doing the cleaning or whatever, and he hears this, and he's just overcome with joy, because they're living this life, this oppressive existence in Mecca. They were expecting a defeat of the Muslims, and then he hears this and he's just overcome with joy. By Allah, those are the angels coming to defend the Muslims and fight. And that really flips Abu Lahab, and he just sees red, and he just needs to take out his anger. So he just jumps up and he pounces on Abu Rafi, and he just starts pummeling him and beating him and knocking him senseless, and sort of, trying to sort of take all his rage out on him. And so Fadl, she, this is her, the slave of the house. This is her house, and Abu Lahab's freaked out and attacking him. And then she sort of said, "Look, what are you doing?" So when the Sayyid, when the master, Al-Abbas, when he is gone, is this what you do to the household? So then she grabs a stick and she, whacks him on the head to get him off Abu Rafi. And so, and that causes a big gash on the back of Abu Lahab's head. And then he turns on Fadl as well, and he starts, beating her. And then, his wound is bleeding, and then he realizes, what he's doing. He's just completely lost it. So then he just basically runs out of there. He's really embarrassed, doesn't know what to do, and then Allah punishes him because it is said that wound that he was inflicted by that basically that ulcerated and became infested, and sort of that disease basically just overtook him, and he basically died alone in his house due to this disease. And then this sort of ulcerating, noxious disease caused by the wife of Al-Abbas, because he was beating up a slave, and this is Allah's justice, and then his body was rotting for 3 days inside the house, and he laid unburied, and it was causing a stench, and nobody would go near the house, and the people of Mecca, they would then go to the sons of Abu Lahab and say, look, he's rotting in there. Do something about it. And they said, look, we don't want to catch whatever he's got. But eventually they were forced to go, and somehow they managed to sort of drag his body, and then they just put it by some rocks or by a wall, and then just put some collapsed the wall on top of him and threw some other stones on top of him, and so they kept their distance, and that's how he met his end, and that's the last of the really vicious, evil batch of the Quraish being sorted as Allah had promised. So again, the people of Mecca, they're enveloped in grief. There's crying in every house, just like the dream of Attica. A complete tragedy has befallen them. And then there's just a sense of gloom everywhere. And then Abu Sufyan, so he's trying to then make sense of things, and he shows some of his leadership qualities. He convenes whatever's left of senior people, okay, and then he instructs them, like, from now on there will be no more wailing, there will be no grief, right? We do not want the Muslims to take pride and pleasure from our grief and our wailing, and we need to show ourselves that we are strong. We're going to get through this. So some really false bravado, and he imposed this curfew of upon people that there should be no public wailing, and the narrators of the seerah says that this actually compounded the grief of the Quraysh, because when you suffer traumatic grief like this, part of coming to terms with that is actually grieving, public grieving, and by being forced not to grieve, what happens is that increases your grief. So this was compounding their sadness, and adding sort of insult to manifest injury. And it's said that one night there was actually one of the Qurayshi ladies who was actually crying, publicly crying. And so this old blind man who had lost his 3 sons, he then sent out his slave and said, can you find out why that lady is crying and wailing? Is it the fact that the ban on crying is lifted so that I can mourn for my son who died in Badr, and he was very close to one of his 3 sons especially. So the slave went and found out that actually the reason why the lady was crying was because she'd lost her camel, so she was wailing. Obviously, it may have been she was just projecting her grief onto her lost camel, and then so the slave came back, and this chappie then wrote some poetry, in some eloquent poetry that he's saying, how can you cry about your lost camels when the lions of the Quraysh have been killed, and then he named his sons as being one of the foremost lions of the Quraysh. So again, this compounded their grief, and Abu Sufyan, he'd said that we should not negotiate the ransom either. We don't want to admit the position that we're in, and we need to be strong. So that's the situation in Mecca. Complete, utter humiliation, annihilation of their dreams and their hopes, and the bravado that they had actually left Mecca with only a few days before. So now, switching over, in the meantime, the Prophet ﷺ, he's still on the plains in Badr. So Monday, so the battle was on the 17th of Ramadan, so 18th Saturday, Sunday the 19th, 20th the Monday. Early morning, he makes preparations to leave from Badr. And as he's leaving, he then sends sends 2 riders to Medina just to get the people ready now, because again there's been rumours in Medina but no official announcement. So then he sends Abdullah ibn Rawahah and Zaid bin Harithah, his adopted son at this stage, and these 2 are dispatched to convey the glad tidings of the victory, the completely one-sided victory to the people of Medina. So we'll get on to that in a second. So those 2 riders are dispatched. Also on the Monday morning, Prophet doesn't know this, but Uthman ibn Affan, who was preparing to leave alongside the Prophet to intercept the caravan, but the Prophet he forbade him to come along with him because the Prophet's daughter Ruqayyah, Uthman's wife, was severely ill. So Uthman and Usama bin Zaid, they were looking after Ruqayyah, the daughter of Rasulullah. But the illness was actually quite advanced, and she actually died in the meantime. And on the morning of the return, on the Monday, Uthman was burying Ruqayyah. So tragedy striking in the very household of the Prophet. The Prophet doesn't know this, obviously, but he's dispatched his riders, and it's said, and I'll come on to this in a second, that as the riders entered into Medina, Abdullah ibn Rawahah at the north and Zaid bin Harithah to the center of Medina, they're shouting Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. They're shouting it really loudly, and Uthman ibn Affan, he is leaving the graveyard in Bakr, and he can hear the shouts of Allahu Akbar, and he's asking, why are these people saying Allahu Akbar? So this is a narration from Usama bin Zaid. And again, I mean, it just goes to show how short and fickle life is, and how much we should be thankful for the blessings. And life is temporary, and even it's almost as if Allah not just testing the Prophet ﷺ, but grounding him that yes, you had this victory, but know that your life here is temporary. So even though this is the most manifest physical victory, his own daughter passed away. So there is that sense of Allah, just completing the story in terms of the Prophet ﷺ's life. And again, the Prophet ﷺ, was an orphan, and then his uncle died. His mother and father died. His uncle died. Grandfather died, and his uncle died. And he buried all his own children apart from Fatima, who's the only one who outlived him. But anyway, getting back to the Monday, the Prophet ﷺ, he's dispatched the 2 riders. He's now returning with the army to Mecca, and then rather than coming straight back to Medina, he diverts the whole army, and they go via the well where the non-Muslims, the Quraish, have been thrown. Now this is 3 days later. So he goes in front of the whole army, and in front of all the prisoners. He gets to the base of the well, and then he starts shouting, and he's naming all of the nobles. Oh, Utbah ibn Ubay, have you found the promise of Allah to be true? Oh, Abu Jahl, have you found the promise of Allah to be true? Oh, Umayyah, have you found the promise of Allah to be true? So he's naming all of the notables one by one, and he's asking them all personally, oh, so and so, have you found the promise of Allah to be true? Because verily, we have found the promise of our Lord to be true. So as he's doing this, the rest of the army and the prisoners, they're all silent. And then Umar ibn al-Khattab, sort of, he plucks up the courage and he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he goes, Ya Rasulullah, how can you speak to bodies that are already decomposed, that have no soul? So he is, he's just trying to make sense of this, because he knows that this is 3 days later, and the ruh has been taken out because this is what they've been told. So he's just trying to make sense of what the Prophet ﷺ is doing. So the Prophet ﷺ, he turns to Umar ibn al-Khattab. He doesn't chastise him. He doesn't say, "Oh, Umar, don't you know that the dead can hear?" No, he doesn't say that. Because once we've talked about this before. What happens to the body upon death. The ruh is ripped out of the disbelievers like a branch of thorns through wet cotton, or just like a drop of water from a jug for the true believers. That's how the ruh is taken out, and then the ruh ascends to the heavens, and then it comes back down, and then you get the angels asking the three questions. But when the person is buried, at that point in time, he can hear the footsteps leaving the graveyard, and then it's all silent. And however, if there's wailing, then obviously that wailing affects so at the point of death, there is some transdimensional link where the ruh can sense something what's happening, but after that that link is broken. So Umar said, look, surely the dead can't hear. Why are you talking to the dead? But this was a particular miracle. And then Prophet he turns to Umar ibn al-Khattab and says, I swear by the ones in whose hands is my soul. So Allah, I swear by the one in whose hands is my soul. You cannot hear me any more than they can, but they cannot respond to me. So this was a special miracle that compounded the grief and the insult of these enemies of Allah, that their soul could actually hear the Prophet ﷺ challenging them whilst they are dead and decomposed, but they can't do anything. And we can just imagine the punishment that they are undergoing in the grave. So that's where the Prophet he talks to these people in the grave, in the well, and then he makes his journey back to Medina. So he's coming back to Medina, and all the rumours are being confirmed now, because you've got Abdullah ibn Rawahah and you've got Zaid bin Harithah, who are now proclaiming and shouting and recounting the magnitude of the victory, and mentioning the people by name, mirroring what was happening in Mecca, but with the complete reverse emotion. So the joy in going through the who's who of the Quraish, the people who have made the lives of the Muslims so difficult, especially for the last decade of the Muhajir. And just name it, so-and-so has died, so-and-so has died, so-and-so has died. And at this point, what we see the rise of a new phenomenon. And it's said that in the interim, in these 2 or 3 days before official word came, that there was rumour spreading that the followers of Abdullah ibn Ubay and the Jews in Medina, they started spreading rumors that, look, something bad has happened and Muslims have been defeated. So they're trying to prepare the ground against the Prophet ﷺ, ready for their own takeover. And so they're sowing these seeds of discontent and these rumors underground. So they're trying to sort of work in a very sort of dastardly way. So and Abdullah ibn Ubay, he's obviously, he was the one who was promised leadership when the Prophet ﷺ then came and usurped what he saw as his legitimate right to rule Medina, following the Battle of Badr some years before that. So then, when Abdullah ibn Ubay he'd heard these rumors that actually this is what's happened, he turns around and it says, well, apparently it appears that the matter has been settled, i.e. that the Prophet ﷺ and Islam and the Muslims are here to stay. They're in charge now. There's no way he can now take over, because again, he is working on the premise that the Quraish are going to sort them out, and then this is just a fad. They'll deal with them. It's just a small group of people, and then I'll be back in control. But now it's, he's come to the realization that actually this, if anything, has consolidated the Prophet ﷺ's leadership, and he is now completely insurmountable. There's no way of challenging him openly. So then he decides with his close followers to become hypocrites. And it's the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't outlaw polytheism. He didn't outlaw the worship of the idols and the Mushrikeen. It just became clear to them following the Battle of Badr that actually the game is up. They either have to become Muslims and give up their ways, or pretend to be Muslims. There's no other path. The Jews have got their own religion, but this complete rout of polytheism by the Muslims on the Battle of Badr, it shows that their way, it's not sustainable. So then these proto-Munafiqeen, the neo-Munafiqeen, these quasi-Muslims, they turn into hypocrites. They can't openly challenge the Prophet ﷺ, so they decide to outwardly become Muslim, but inwardly work against Islam. Because when Zaid bin Harithah, he'd come into Medina, he'd come on the Prophet ﷺ's own camel, al-Khaswa, and these were the people saying, look, this guy's gone crazy, Zaid's gone mad, they've lost it, he's delirious. The proof is that he's riding Prophet ﷺ's camel. How can the Prophet ﷺ have won when Zaid's riding his camel? He's just delirious. But again, then the news settles. The news settles down, and they dispatch other people, and then it's quite clear that the Muslims have been victorious, and the Quraish and the Mushrikeen have been utterly humiliated. So then the Prophet ﷺ, he enters into Medina, and you can just imagine the sense of joy amongst the people of Medina. This was beyond belief. They went out in a rush for a caravan, and now there's been complete defeat and annihilation of the Quraysh army. And on top of that, they've killed the top leadership of the Quraysh. And on top of that, they've taken prisoners. And on top of that, they've had minimal casualties, a few casualties, but compared to the odds, minimal casualties. So so just imagine the feelings of the Muslims, and again some of the people they're heading out to meet the Prophet before he gets into Medina. Like, for example, there's someone called Zaid ibn Ubay, and he gallops out to a place called Rawahah, and he joins up with the Prophet's triumphant army, and he goes to the Prophet, and he's sort of like acting as an emissary for the people of Medina, and really praising Allah, praising the army, praising the Prophet, and then he excused himself for saying, look, I would have joined you, I would have been with you, but we just thought you were going out for the caravan. Had I known that there was going to be real fighting, real war, by Allah, I would have been with you. This was, it was because it was just a caravan, and you said that whoever's with me, whose camel is ready, we need to go now. We just thought there was that, but had I known it was war, I would have come fighting with you. And the Prophet he assured Zaid and said, yes, what you're saying is true. I believe you. And so the Prophet then enters into Medina with his 70 plus prisoners. There are no prisons. Where are they going to house these people? What are they going to do? They hadn't, this is not something that they had planned. So obviously, where is he going to take them? He takes them to the Masjid al-Nabawi, and all the prisoners, they are first taken to the Masjid. The army is taken to the Masjid. Prophet offers to Ruqayyah of thanks to Allah, and then we'll talk next about what happens with the prisoners in more detail. For example, the story of Suhail bin Amr. We'll reiterate what happened to Abu Aziz, the brother of Musab ibn Umair, al-Abbas, and what happened with him. Someone called Abu Azza, the son of Abu Sufyan, Amr bin Abu Sufyan, and some of the other things that happened with the prisoners, such as Abu al-As ibn Rabi'ah, who was married to Zainab bint Muhammad. So all of these things, inshallah, we'll deal with next week, but we'll finish there, inshallah. And again, if you have any questions or comments, do get in touch. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, or do catch us up on Facebook, etc. Do remember us in your du'as, and again, just go over these stories. And if you can, just read Surah Al-Anfal, inshallah. We'll do that maybe not next week, but the week after, because it's the reason we're spending so much time on the Battle of Badr is because it's a phenomenal story, and it is a really beautiful story. So inshallah, we'll talk again next week. So we'll finish there. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa la sarayna al-insan wa la fi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu s-salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.